There exists a category of men who are rarely discussed accurately. They do not dominate conversations. They do not posture for authority. They do not attempt to impress rooms they do not respect. And yet, when situations collapse, when emotions flare, when chaos begins to expose people's true nature, these men remain unusually composed. Their calm is not accidental. Their distance is not confusion. Their coldness is not emptiness. It is a structure. The Sigma male is not shaped by applause or rejection. He's shaped by pattern recognition, solitude, and the slow accumulation of internal clarity. In a society that rewards visibility, emotional expression, and constant reaction, the Sigma male appears almost out of place. But what looks like detachment is often intelligence conserving itself. What looks like emotional coldness is often regulation. And what looks like indifference is usually discernment. Intelligence, at its highest level, is not measured by speed of speech or emotional expressiveness. It is measured by accuracy of judgment, restraint under pressure, and the ability to act without being psychologically pulled apart by impulse. Sigma males tend to develop these traits not because they are born superior, but because their path forces them to rely on internal systems rather than social reinforcement. This produces a very specific psychological profile: quiet, observant, emotionally contained, and strategically independent. To understand why Sigma males are often perceived as the smartest and coldest men in the world, one must move beyond stereotypes and examine the underlying psychological mechanisms that shape their behavior. What follows is not mythology. It is not fantasy. It is an examination of how certain men adapt to the modern world by withdrawing from unnecessary emotional noise and refining their internal operating system. Rating point 1, Sigma males think in systems, not emotions. Most people navigate life emotionally first and cognitively second, reacting to events through feeling before understanding, allowing anger to precede clarity, excitement to override caution, and fear to distort perception. The Sigma male, through experience rather than ideology, learns to reverse this order. This reversal does not remove emotion from his inner world, it reorganizes it. He allows analysis to occur before emotional engagement, not because he suppresses feeling, but because he values accuracy over impulse. When conflict arises, his instinct is not to defend his identity, explain his intentions, or retaliate against perceived disrespect. His instinct is to observe. He studies tone, timing, context, body language, and incentive. He asks what is truly happening beneath the surface of the interaction rather than reacting to the surface itself. Human behavior follows patterns, and emotional outbursts are rarely spontaneous or random. They are often signals of unmet needs, insecurity, fear of loss, or an attempt to regain control. The Sigma male trains himself to recognize these patterns early, before emotional contagion takes hold. As a result, he does not personalize reactions that were never about him. He does not internalize projections, accusations, or emotional pressure as truth. To the outside world, this restraint can resemble coldness or emotional distance. In reality, it is cognitive prioritization. He is choosing clarity over chaos. Systems thinking allows the Sigma male to remain stable in environments where others become reactive and destabilized. He sees cause and effect instead of insult and retaliation. He understands that many emotional displays are strategic, even when the person expressing them is not consciously aware of their strategy. By stepping back emotionally, he gains a wider frame of reference. He can assess long-term consequences rather than chasing short-term emotional relief. This capacity to delay gratification, delay reaction, and delay emotional investment until clarity is achieved is a hallmark of high intelligence and psychological maturity. Over time, this discipline becomes automatic. He no longer has to force calm. Calm becomes his baseline. Emotional neutrality becomes his default state, not because he lacks depth, but because he has mastered control. He still feels, but his feelings no longer govern his decisions. This does not make him heartless or detached from humanity. It makes him precise, deliberate, and difficult to manipulate. Point 2. Sigma males understand the value of energy conservation. Intelligence is not only about thinking well, it is about allocating energy wisely, and this distinction separates reactive minds from deliberate ones. Every interaction has a cost, whether visible or subtle. Every argument consumes cognitive bandwidth. Every emotional explanation requires attention, memory, and regulation. Most people do not notice these costs because they are spread across daily life in small habitual leaks. They explain themselves when no explanation is required. They defend positions that offer no real return. They engage in social performances to secure approval that has no lasting value. Over time, this constant output creates mental fatigue, emotional noise, and a scattered inner state. The Sigma male learns, often through exhaustion rather than theory, that not every situation deserves his energy. He recognizes that silence can be more efficient than clarification and restraint more powerful than reaction. He does not feel compelled to prove himself because proof demands attention, and attention is finite. He does not rush to correct misunderstandings that do not alter his long-term direction. He understands that many perceptions are temporary, emotionally driven, and outside his control. Attempting to manage them would require constant effort with little strategic benefit. This restraint is frequently misinterpreted as arrogance or emotional coldness, but it is neither. It is efficiency. High-functioning individuals tend to conserve resources instinctively. They avoid pointless battles not because they fear conflict, but because they calculate cost versus return. The Sigma male disengages from low-yield interactions and invests only where clarity, growth, or alignment are possible. This awareness reshapes his social behavior over time. He becomes selective with conversations, choosing depth over frequency. He becomes selective with relationships, prioritizing stability over stimulation. He becomes selective with emotional exposure, sharing only where trust and purpose exist. This selectivity is not withdrawal born of insecurity. It is discipline born of self-knowledge. By avoiding constant emotional stimulation, he preserves mental clarity and cognitive depth. His thinking becomes less reactive and more internally generated, guided by reflection rather than impulse. What appears as coldness is, in reality, strategic minimalism. He does not seek to dominate social environments or extract validation from them. He seeks to move through them with minimal friction, maintaining internal order while external noise passes by. His intelligence is not expressed through accumulation of opinions, arguments, or social victories, but through subtraction. He removes what distracts, what drains, and what does not serve clarity. And in that removal, his strength quietly sharpens. Point 3. Sigma males are comfortable with loneliness. Loneliness is one of the most powerful psychological pressures a human being can experience. Not because it is inherently destructive, but because it strips away distraction and exposes the mind to itself. Many people will sacrifice authenticity, compromise values, and abandon long-term well-being simply to avoid being alone. because solitude forces an encounter they are unprepared for. The Sigma male, however, takes a different path. Whether by conscious choice or unavoidable circumstance, he spends extended periods in solitude, and this solitude is not romanticized. It is often uncomfortable, quiet, and confronting. It brings unresolved thoughts to the surface, magnifies past failures, and removes the soothing buffer of constant social feedback. Yet this discomfort is precisely what makes it formative. Over time, prolonged solitude strengthens internal dialogue. The mind learns to regulate itself without immediate external reassurance. Dependency on validation weakens, and self-reliance quietly grows. When a man learns to sit with himself without distraction, without entertainment, and without an audience, he begins to think independently. He no longer requires agreement to feel grounded, nor does he need constant feedback to confirm his existence or worth. This psychological independence is rare because it is forged, not taught. It emerges only after repeated exposure to isolation without escape. As a result, the Sigma male becomes less emotionally reactive to social inclusion or exclusion. Praise does not intoxicate him, and rejection does not destabilize him because he has already faced the absence of connection and survived it internally. This is where his perceived coldness often originates. It is not a lack of feeling, but a lack of fear. He does not chase connection out of anxiety or loneliness. He chooses connection only when it aligns with his values, timing, and inner stability. Loneliness becomes a training ground rather than a punishment, a controlled environment where emotional reflexes are examined and refined. In this space, the Sigma male clarifies his principles, sharpens his long-term goals, and establishes firm emotional boundaries. He learns which emotions carry useful information and which are simply noise generated by insecurity or social conditioning. This internal calibration produces a man who is grounded, measured, and resistant to manipulation because his sense of self is internally anchored rather than socially negotiated. Intelligence grows in silence. Depth forms in stillness. The Sigma male does not merely endure this process, he understands it intuitively and allows it to shape him. Point 4, Sigma males see through social performances. Much of modern interaction is performative, shaped by an unspoken demand to be seen, affirmed, and reacted to. People present curated versions of themselves, designed to signal competence, virtue, vulnerability, or dominance, often shifting these masks depending on the audience. The Sigma male moves through this environment without hostility, but also without illusion. He understands the performance is there, yet he does not mistake it for substance. Because he does not rely heavily on external validation, he is not easily impressed by status symbols, emotional displays, or rehearsed confidence. His attention moves past the surface. He listens beyond words, noticing tone, timing, restraint, and contradiction. He observes how people behave when outcomes are uncertain, when pressure is applied, or when recognition is absent. Over time, he learns that consistency reveals more than charisma. This observational capacity is not rooted in bitterness or distrust, but in pattern recognition developed through experience. He notices how principles are often stable only when they are convenient. He sees how loyalty can soften when incentives shift, how promises weaken under stress, and how moral language is frequently used as a tool rather than a compass. This awareness does not make him withdrawn, it makes him selective. He does not rush intimacy. He does not equate openness with safety. He understands that trust is built through repeated alignment between words and actions, not through emotional intensity or shared disclosure. As a result, he shares less until clarity is earned. This restraint is often misread as emotional distance or detachment. In reality, it is a form of psychological self-protection grounded in self-knowledge. The Sigma male recognizes that transparency without discernment is vulnerability without strategy. By remaining reserved, he preserves agency over his emotional exposure. He does not give others immediate access to his inner state, not because he fears connection, but because he values it. This creates a calm, unreadable presence that alters the dynamics around him. Some feel unsettled by the lack of leverage, others feel steadied by the absence of drama. Those who rely on emotional manipulation find him resistant and difficult to move. Those who value substance, consistency, and quiet strength recognize his stability and respond with respect. Point 5, Sigma males master emotional self-regulation. Emotional intelligence is often misunderstood as emotional expressiveness, as if strength lies in displaying every feeling openly and immediately. In reality, emotional intelligence is emotional management, the ability to regulate inner states without being ruled by them. The Sigma male does not suppress emotion, nor does he deny its existence. He processes it privately, away from unnecessary attention. He allows feelings to pass through analysis rather than action, creating a deliberate pause between stimulus and response. When anger arises, he does not act on impulse. He examines its source, questioning whether it is rooted in ego, insecurity, or a genuine boundary violation. When sadness appears, he observes it without dramatization, understanding that emotions are temporary internal signals rather than permanent identities. When excitement emerges, he tempers it with realism, preventing overcommitment or reckless optimism. This internal regulation prevents emotional volatility, which is one of the primary causes of poor judgment. It reduces impulsive decision-making and replaces reaction with strategy. Over time, this practice creates consistency of behavior, and consistency is a hallmark of trustworthiness and competence. People know what to expect from him, not because he is predictable in thought, but because he's stable in conduct. The Sigma male's perceived coldness is not numbness. It is containment. He does not broadcast his internal fluctuations or outsource his emotional processing to others. He does not burden people with unresolved emotional states, unresolved anger, or unfiltered frustration. This restraint often develops after experiencing the consequences of emotional impulsivity earlier in life, when words spoken in haste or actions taken in heightened emotion created unnecessary damage. Pain becomes a teacher, not an identity. Reflection becomes a discipline, not a weakness. Over time, emotional stability replaces emotional expression as the priority, not because expression is wrong, but because control is more valuable. This shift allows the Sigma male to function effectively in high-pressure environments where others become reactive, defensive, or erratic. He does not panic easily. He does not escalate conflicts unnecessarily. He does not seek emotional release through confrontation or validation through drama. His intelligence is expressed through composure, through the quiet ability to remain centered when circumstances attempt to destabilize him. In a world driven by emotional noise, his restraint becomes a strategic advantage. Point 6. Sigma males are goal-oriented, not validation-oriented. Many men unconsciously organize their lives around perception. They monitor reactions, adjust their language, soften their convictions, and shape their identity to remain acceptable within the social environment around them. Approval becomes a silent currency, and behavior is subtly negotiated in exchange for belonging. The Sigma male gradually steps away from this framework, not out of rebellion, bitterness, or superiority, but out of clarity. Over time, he realizes that a life governed by external validation is inherently unstable. Opinions shift, social favor fluctuates, and what is praised today may be condemned tomorrow. Basing decisions on such moving ground creates internal friction and constant emotional recalibration. The Sigma male replaces this instability with an internal reference point. His actions are filtered through alignment rather than applause. He measures choices by whether they serve long-term objectives, personal principles, and deliberate direction, not by how they are received in the moment. This internal orientation fundamentally alters his emotional economy. Praise no longer elevates him because it is not the source of his confidence. Criticism no longer dismantles him because it is not the authority he answers to. What emerges is a form of emotional neutrality that many misinterpret as coldness or detachment. In reality, it is focus. His emotional energy is conserved and applied intentionally rather than dispersed through constant reaction. He understands that validation is volatile, governed by trends, group dynamics, and the emotional states of others. Purpose, on the other hand, is durable. It offers continuity when external feedback becomes noisy or contradictory. By anchoring himself to purpose instead of approval, the Sigma male gains psychological autonomy. This autonomy grants him the ability to make unpopular decisions, tolerate misunderstanding, and pursue outcomes that require patience rather than instant reward. It also renders him difficult to manipulate through shame, flattery, or social pressure, because those levers no longer control his internal state. His intelligence expresses itself through self-direction. He does not wait for consensus to act. He does not seek permission to move toward meaning. He advances quietly, steadily, and deliberately, guided by an internal compass rather than collective opinion. This level of independence is uncommon and often isolating, but it produces a man who is internally aligned, externally composed, and structurally resilient to the psychological turbulence of the crowd. The Sigma male is not the smartest and coldest man because he rejects emotion or denies his humanity. He is this way because he understands both with clarity and restraint. He has learned, often through experience rather than theory, that emotional discipline is not repression but mastery, that silence is not weakness but control, and that distance is not disengagement but perspective. In a world saturated with constant noise, emotional reactivity, and performative identity, the Sigma male represents a different model of masculinity, one that does not compete for attention or validation. His strength is internal, built through observation, self-regulation, and an ability to remain composed under pressure. His intelligence operates quietly, without the need to announce itself. His coldness is not cruelty, but a function, allowing him to think clearly where others are overwhelmed. And his presence, though understated and often overlooked, carries weight precisely because it is grounded, deliberate, and never desperate to be seen or approved.